day has been with Dwight's presentation this morning, now this panel, retired, emeriti, history faculty. Been looking forward to this for several months. In fact, it was really kind of an idea or a dream that I've been thinking about for 2 or 3 years, that, to have a reunion of the history faculty. I'm not going to make introductions. I'm going to let Professor Rosenberg do that. He's the only one who's not retired. Professor Rosenberg is really the dean of the history department. That means he's the old geezer of the department. He's been here the longest. I'm really making light of it, but Mark's very important in the department, and he was the last person, I believe, that Robert LaFollette hired in his position. And then Dr. LaFollette closed it up after that. But we're delighted that you all are here, and I look forward to hearing your remarks and seeing the slides that Phyllis has brought. So I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you. This is the department's somewhat modest contribution to the commemoration of Ball State University's Ball State Teachers College, Eastern Division, Indiana Normal School, 75 anniversary year. And we are fortunate to have assembled a number of emeriti, from the most recent emeritus to somebody who's been gone for several years. I am the oldest member of the department in point of service, and you can tell that I'm getting old when I looked at the year that colleagues and I got our PhDs, and I'm the only one left from the 1950s. There's at least a 6-year or 7-year gap in terms of doctorates. On my extreme left is John Jack Schrader, who retired about the time we switched to the semester system, if my memory is correct. The newest emeritus, Dick Summers, somewhere in between, in the middle, Bob Houston. Bob Houston, I might say, was so irreplaceable that it took us several years before we finally got around to hiring somebody in diplomatic history. On my right, of course, Dwight Hoover, who gave the splendid and very entertaining and very informative, it's always nice to travel down memory lane, I suppose, talk this morning, and Phyllis Uhas. All of us, myself included, since I was hired by Dr. LaFollette, we have this link that can go back through LaFollette to 1921. So you could argue that we represent, indirectly, if not directly, 72 out of the 75 years of Ball State's history. The format is a loose format. Each of the persons are going to be asked to share with us some recollections of what the history department and working with colleagues and with Ball State Teachers College, etc., was like, and how they perhaps reacted when we became an emerging university. And as Dwight pointed out, presumably we either fallen back or we have emerged, one or the other. So I don't know if Jack wants to get started, but go ahead, Jack. After which we will have questions from the audience or comments, if you wish. And Phyllis also has some slides, so she's going to, in effect, bring up the rear.
I retired in 1983 after 27 years here. And among other things I got from the university was a plaque or a diploma congratulating me on 28 years. And I didn't mind one way or another. I was reminded of that when I got a letter from Ray White last week. He said, "I'm delighted you will be able to participate as a panel member on Thursday, October 27th. is it Thursday or is it Wednesday or what? And I finally looked at the parking ticket. It said Wednesday, and I knew then it was Wednesday. When I came here in the middle 1950s, it was a sort of an autocracy, as Dwight mentioned this morning. Department heads were people of considerable power, and you can see their mementos scattered around the campus: La Follette Halls, Johnson Halls, Cooper Science Building. They held office indefinitely until they resigned or retired or expired. In some ways, it was sort of nice to have an autocrat. I thought La Follette always treated me very well. I think he sort of liked me. We went to the same schools. He got his undergraduate degrees at Wisconsin, graduate at George Washington. I was just the opposite, George Washington, Wisconsin. And he, of course, took on everything himself, and we didn't have to have many committees, which was always a marvelous thing as far as I was concerned. I remember the department meetings in the first year or so. We'd sit around a table not much bigger than this one, maybe 12, 15 people. That was the history department, the political science department, the sociology department, economics, anthropology, philosophy, one of each in the latter, with the historians making up the most of the department. La Follette, I think, believed that you could teach anything, as Dwight mentioned this morning. And by the way, Dwight, I also taught history of the South one time. And I was all right. It was a two-quarter thing. It was all right until I got past the Civil War. And then it was very hard going indeed. But you'd run into these students year after year, you know, and they say, I had you in history of the South. And you felt sort of like crawling under the rug. But I got through it. One thing I refused to do, though, and this was in summer. In summer, of course, is when we made the money that kept us going, getting more per summer session than we did during the regular year. And La Follette offered me a course if I would teach economics. And I said, I've never had a single course in economics, and I don't really think I should do this. And I didn't. You know who taught that? Well, Miller. Taught it. I think he had some courses in it.
Well, he had children to raise.
Well, that's more than I had. I'm also very grateful to Ball State recently. They came up to Wisconsin to play Wisconsin in football. This was about 3 or 4 years ago when Wisconsin wasn't very good. And Pat and I decided we want to go to the game, and I thought, well, we'll contact the Ball State people. They had a reception at the Concourse Hotel, and we'll get good seats. The president of Ball State is coming and all the brass. Surely they're going to put us somewhere than where we usually sit, which is up so high that the players look like that. Well, we got to the reception, and by golly, we had seats on the lower level. Now, they weren't in the end zone, but they were almost in the end zone. Donna Shalala came down and visited our group during the course of the game, but the highlight was that Wisconsin won, and I think that was the only game they won all year. And I remember the Ball State people were very interested in seeing the McLean facility, whatever they do in it, indoor football, I guess. Steve Yoder was there. There are no monuments to him in Wisconsin. But it was good to see everybody, and I will now pass it on to somebody else.
Dick?
Well, I just finished 35 years here at Ball State in June, and felt it was time to retire, as did many others, I think. And my ties go back a little bit longer than that. I have a little bit different perspective than some on the panel, because I'd been spending about 2-year hitch guarding Kansas and be bleeding again while they were sorting out across the water what to do now that Stalin was dead. And all of a sudden they sent our whole division to Germany, and I would have liked to have gone, but it required signing up for more duty, and I didn't see that. So they didn't know what to do with me, so they sent me out to Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was sitting around out there doing nothing, actually, and I decided, well, they let you out early. So I wrote to Dean Robert Kinnicker about entering graduate school here, and I think 48 hours later I had an admittance and instructions as to what to do when I arrived on campus. That's the way they did things in those days. So I met with him and got started the second summer. I got home on Friday night, came over here on Monday and started school. 54, I finished a master's in what they call social science, and which I took mostly history. In those days, you could take so many hours of whatever seemed to be suitable for you. And there was no big fuss about taking certain courses, so you could choose. I chose mostly history. The first professor I had was in the fall, and it was the same Robert LaFollette that's been mentioned so frequently here today. As I recollect the man, he could be ordered up by Alfred Hitchcock or John Huston or Orson Welles, who were big in those days, because his eye contact was marvelous. And he had a very soft voice. And it could even sound a little menacing if you were young, you know, like I was at that time. And we took representative Americans. There was one woman in the class and the rest of us were men. And the idea was you'd study one life, you would make a written report, you'd make an oral report, an hour oral report. And it didn't matter who you studied. It could be anybody, because he seemed to be on intimate terms with almost all of them that we chose. And the woman gave her report, and we were supportive in our critique.
You said louder.
Louder?
Yeah.
We were supportive in our critique, and then he began to analyze the whole report, and all of a sudden we realized that he was cutting this report to shreds, but doing it in a very mild way. And it was kind of a scary experience, really. Anyhow, I had him twice for that. Then I ran into Dick Caldemeyer, whom I had 3 times, and was one of my heroes. When I began to teach history here, I think I chose 2 role models to model myself after, and one was Roscoe Carlisle Bewley from IU, who had won a Pulitzer Prize the year I graduated from there, and the other was Dick Caldemeyer. And I liked the way he taught. The other role models that I accepted to kind of throw in a little bit of was the drama of Edward R. Murrow and the indignation of Paul Harvey. And I hope that I amalgamated those and doing a little bit of myself as well. Everyone has, the only thing about Caldemeyer was he had an affinity for going to a blackboard and drawing freehand a map of the old Northwest Territory, putting in all the rivers and its tributaries, and didn't see why we couldn't do that. And he said to me when the course was over, if you can ever learn to draw, you might be a pretty good history teacher. Bob LaFollette told me that if I would ever get focused and serious, I might be one too, as he looked deeply into my eyes. Anyhow, when a few years later, I decided very rashly, I think, that I wanted to teach some history here. So I went over to see John Hannaford. He wasn't too enthusiastic about the whole project. But eventually I did get selected to come and teach a history course now and then. And I found that this was always a strong department. Everybody felt that way. And they were very humane people, and they had a sense of humor, and they went about their business. They didn't seem to have too many of these interdepartmental squabbles that tended to get out of hand and all that. It was just that's my perception. It was a good place to be. And they were very helpful to me, always cordial, and I hope you don't mind if I use an example of one you told me. I was teaching the latter part of the 19th century, and I went to Bob and I said, Bob, I don't understand these intricacies of these problems over currency and the tariff. And his reply to me was that, well, do what the rest of us do. He said, just mention that they were serious issues at the time. Are there any questions? and go on to the charge up San Juan Hill. That's what everybody's waiting for.
That's free silver.
So that was good help. And those are some of my perceptions as to the history department. It was always a strong department, and still is a strong department, and I'm proud to have been associated with it.
Thank you, Dick. Bob? It's with some trepidation that I turn it over to Bob.
I don't know why they fear me. None of my children did, and did as they darn well pleased. I came here in 1958, and was here 26 or 27 or 28 years. I didn't read that letter they sent telling me how many years it was, so I couldn't do the mathematics. And then I was hired, of course, by Dr. La Follette, and I think I had admiration and respect for him. As Mr. Schrader mentioned, he certainly relieved us from the burdens of committee meetings. I was hired to teach a course, 2 courses, and I arrived and he told me not only what I was going to teach, but what my textbook would be. So we never had textbook committees either. We remember Hicks in U.S. history. I think La Follette had a course from him in Madison, so that was our text. And in the methods business, Edgar Wesley had been a good friend of La Follette, so of course we're using his book. So he was a dictator. He was a benevolent dictator. I presume if you got on the wrong side of him, the benevolence could perhaps be a little bit tempered, should I say, tempered benevolence. I remember, some of the people here might remember that we were having a campaign for chairman of the department. And who was the ringer that was brought in? Do you remember that, John?
Which department? This one?
The history department. This was about 8 or 10 years ago. I think John was elected then.
Hannaford, yes.
But somebody brought in a character who had apparently run afoul of La Follette and had lasted here 1 year. Don't you remember the issue?
I remember the correspondence would come through the mail. I don't remember the name.
Now, somebody kept putting things in our mailboxes. Vote for John Jones. That wasn't his name at all. And nobody even knew who he was. Except finally, Everett Farrell, we got him aside, and Everett remembered, oh yes, that was a fellow who made La Follette lose sleep, and who lasted apparently 1 year, and was run out of town. By the way, we never found out who was the prankster who did that. I think everybody in the department knew it was either me or John Weakland. And I think John tends to go to his grave knowing darn well I did it. Fortunately, the perpetrators of that dastardly deed confessed to me about a month or so after I retired, or before I retired, saying that we knew nobody on the campus would know who he was, and they told me that they had done it, but under a promise that I could not tell. So, John, I did not do it, and I finally forgave you because I knew you had done it. But that's neither here nor there. I was merely throwing that out as an example that La Follette could cut throats if he felt it was necessary. Anyhow, I looked up some things in preparation for this. Such as I saved all the old salary schedules. Remember? Mine go back to 1958 when I came here. In case you're interested, by the way, they broke the 5-digit salary effective 1962. That is, beginning with the fall of 1962, a professor with a PhD and 18 years of experience could make $10,100. Prior to that, nobody on the faculty, unless he was outside the salary schedule, and I'm sure there was never any deviations in this, nobody made $10,000 until 1962. I came in 1958 at $5,900. Somehow or other I was thinking it was $5,800, but I see here it was $5,900. Jack had mentioned the fact that La Follette was of the conviction that if you had a PhD in history, you could teach anything. I don't think he ever approached anybody for home economics, but he did approach us on economics. He's mentioned Miller and Jack. The last summer, I think, that La Follette was in charge, I was teaching a class at the end of the first summer session. It was over in the brand new music building, and giving the final exam, and one of my students called my attention to somebody rapping at the window there, and I went to the window, and there was Dr. La Follette. He says, "Bob, I have great news for you. We have one economics course that hasn't made for the second summer session, and I'm offering it to you." I have a hunch he'd probably offered it to Jack and a few other people who turned him down, but I was like Miller. I had children to raise. But on the other hand, I was been very active in the Naval Reserve, and I had a 2 weeks training duty scheduled to begin either the following Saturday or something like that in Norfolk. And La Follette said, oh, he knew I could teach the econ. By the way, I'd never had a course in economics in my life. I had taught it, however, on both the high school and the college level. But on the one hand, here I was offered 5 weeks for a grand total. I figured it out this afternoon. I would have made about $550 in 5 weeks teaching economics. Or I also checked out, the Navy paid me $581 to go to Norfolk and take my family for a vacation on the beach and loaf for 2 weeks. I carefully explained to La Follette that I was already scheduled for this thing in the Navy. If I didn't go, in all probability, the Russian Navy would be out on Prairie Creek Reservoir coming up the White River within a fortnight. And of course, he got a little smile. He shook his head, yes, yes, yes. But he went away and recruited somebody else. So I turned him down. I think the next year was his last year, so he never got a chance to retaliate. And when he left, I thought we were still pretty good friends. I looked up a few things, like, for example, Dwight was saying this morning, he, 8 years without teaching what he really wanted to teach? I did 9 years before I taught what I wanted to teach. However, for example, in the school year of 61-62, when we were doing 16 hours, I had a full schedule of what was the U.S. History Survey, the colonial early period in the fall, the 19th century in the winter, and the 20th century in the spring. And I averaged about 46 people in each one of those 4 sections. So what would that be, 200 people a term? No sweat. The first graduate course I had was the New South. When you
Got around.
And believe it or not, there were 37 students in there. Where in the world they ever rounded up 37 graduate students for the summer of 1965? They did. And I presume most of those people maybe knew more about it than I did, but they're all too polite to tell me that. One final item here. How about the fees? I remember I used to ask the students, how much do you pay? 1955, it was $37 a term. By 1960, it was up to 61 was up to $75. Where are they now? $1,000 a semester?
1,200.
1,200. Well, we were a bargain, I'm telling you. At $75 a head. Maybe that's why they only paid us $6,000 a year or something like that. Let me tell one more story. You mentioned Dean Kenker, who some of them old-timers I remember, he was a real go. That graduate school was off and running. And one of the all-day faculty meetings we had, probably around 1960, we used to have those, by the way, every quarter. And the president would come up sometimes with a theme, and one time the theme was a graduate program. And Bob Kenker was just all enthusiasm, pointed out to us that the graduate enrollment was increasing, was doubling every 5 years. And the fellow who was sitting next to me was a smart aleck. I wasn't. And he asked Kenker at a little break, well, how long do you think the graduate enrollment will continue to double every 5 years? Indefinitely. Well, we had already done the mathematics on it. And if the graduate enrollment of about 800 at that time continued to double in every 5 years indefinitely, by 1995, there would have been 100,000 graduate students. By 2020, there would be 3.2 million graduate students here at Ball State. Bob Kenker, where are you?
Thank you, Bob. Before we turn to Dwight Hoover, and since I am the moderator and therefore have control of the microphone, I have a reminiscence or two I'd like to share, one of which involves this wise guy here. There was a member of our department who was rather quiet, somewhat shy, indeed withdrawn, certainly low-key, and I had never met him. And I had come to Ball State in 1961, and I don't think I ran into him for the several months. And then I saw him, and I wondered who he was. And I asked the wrong person. I asked Bob, now who's that guy over there? He said, oh, you want to keep away from him? He's got a triggered temper. He's got a cantankerous nature. He'll bite your head off if you hit him at the wrong time of day. Hamilton Easton.
I was told if I spoke this morning, I didn't have to do anything this afternoon.
They lied.
I remember mostly students and fellow faculty, particularly the ones who were kind of characters. Speaking of Ham Easton, when I first came, I had an office on the third floor of the arts building. It was kind of a suite there. And I had an office with Merrill Rippey. It was a good office. Ham Easton had one down the hall. Those of you who knew Ham knew that he sat in his office with the lights off and a green eye shade on, along with sleeve garters. And I would usually work pretty late, and the phone would ring, and it'd be Mrs. Easton. And where's Ham? I'd look, and the light would be off, and I didn't hear anything. I said, I think he's gone home. So I'd go back to the office, be working. Pretty soon I'd hear a door close, and look out, and there was Ham going home. The office was a good office. I liked it when Merrill was there. I remember again, we had a fellow actually who was temporary for a year, a man by the name of Prater, who had a very bad reputation, deservedly so. I was sitting in my office one day, and that time we had 20 hours of student help. And I heard this terrible yell across. My secretary was sitting across the way, and I came out and I said, what's the matter? She said, somebody goosed me. And it turned out it was Mr. Prater who had slipped in and goosed the secretary and be immediately fired. But we didn't do anything in those days. But he was fired. He lasted a year. And the reason he was let go was that there were no sanitary facilities for men up on the 3rd floor. There was a ladies' room, but no men's room, and he used to use the ladies' room. Now, yes, he locked the door, but no women complained. It was a janitor who complained, and the janitor succeeded in having his complaints heard. But I have a lot of good memories. I too taught the summer school bit. I remember one summer I was painting the window frames on my house. I hadn't gotten any summer school that year, and it was very hot. And then suddenly I got a call saying that Jacques Goutor, whom you all remember, Jacques, was teaching a course in sociology, and he'd been shifted to something else. And if I would come and teach it, there was a week that had already passed that I would get full pay, and he had shifted to something else. So I saw Jacques, and he told me what text he was using and so on. And I said, well, what have you been doing in this course? And he said, this was a social problems course. He said, we've been working on social dysfunction for a week. I thought, for a week? I said, well, what's the matter? He said, the students just don't understand that. They don't understand what social dysfunction is. I didn't understand it either. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, Friday, he said, I told him, he said, I got exasperated. I just said, it's like constipation in society. And so I knew it wouldn't be any task to teach that. I also learned a lot from some of my students. I remember one student who did what I thought was a wonderful dissertation, one of the early dissertations, a female student who did one on the National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities, which I thought and still think was an excellent dissertation. And she seemed a very likable person. She was bright and so on, and I had no inclination of any problems. And then the year later, she ran off with somebody's wife. And, I realized I didn't know what kind of people I was dealing with. But again, I have very fond memories, and I'm not going to tell you one more. Well, I'll tell you one more. Again, it has to do with Ham Easton, who was not the world's best dresser, as you remember. And one day I was walking along the arts building, and I heard two students talking to each other. And if you remember, there were two Eastons in the building. One of them was Roger, who taught art, who was very well dressed, and then there was Ham, who was not. And this one student said to the other said, Dr. Easton has the world's best ties. And the other student said, oh.
Thank you. When I attended the University of Iowa for my PhD, Dwight and I overlapped 1 year, but there was a recent PhD whom I had not met, but about whom various faculty spoke from time to time, and her name was Phyllis Nelson. And she went to some place called Ball State Teachers College, whatever that meant. Ultimately, when I came in 1961, there was Dwight and, of course, Phyllis Nelson Uhas. And she's going to, in effect, bring up the rear, and she also has slides to show us. So when she's ready for the slides, the panel will vacate. And Phyllis?
Okay. Well, I might say a few things before I do the slides of my role here. I came here in '52. We think that was a very premier class. That's when Dean Burkhardt and Dwayne Deal, and I think there were, I don't know, 20 or 25 or something, but most of us stayed on. I don't know whether jobs were hard to get in those days and we couldn't go elsewhere, or we really liked it, but at any rate, we were a very enduring class. And so I was here for 36 years until I retired in '88. That's the year we went to semesters, which I hadn't particularly favored, and so I thought that made a good excuse to get out while the getting was good. I came as sort of a reverse affirmative action of some sort. President Emmons had decided that they needed more women in the social science department. Floy Painter was the only woman they had, and he thought they needed another one. So he'd had pretty good luck with the placement officer at the University of Iowa, so he called out there and said, he just got, some of you may remember Ted and Rosemary Fisher and Cecily Gilbert in the phys ed department had just come from Iowa and were very successful and good PE teachers, and so I guess he liked Iowa products, and so he called and said, do you have any women who are finishing? And I wasn't quite finished, but I was the closest in history to finish. And so they said, would you be interested in Ball State? They have a position at Ball State Teachers College. Would you be interested? And I said, where's that? And I never heard of it. And they said, well, it's in Muncie, Indiana. Well, I had heard of Middletown, so I said, no. Okay, so I came over for an interview. And Dr. LaFollette was in Germany, so he was not the one who hired me. Dr. Painter was in charge of the department, and she's the one who showed me around and took me to see Dean Neuer and did all the actual hiring. I'm always kind of amazed when I think of myself now, because at that time I thought of her as really extremely old. And it's kind of a blow to think of myself as even more than the Dr. Painter of the department now. And she used to ride a bicycle, and I thought, oh, isn't that amazing? And I own 4 of them myself, so my attitude has somewhat changed over the years. There were 5 of us who had offices in the same room. There was a room on the 2nd floor of the arts building, and 5 professors and 5 student helpers, student secretaries shared that room. And so there was no great privacy. It was a very companionable arrangement. There were 4 departments in the arts building: foreign language, art, English, and social science, all housed in the same building, plus a lot of our classrooms for those departments. And there was this sort of rivalry that went on between Alice Nichols and Dr. LaFollette. And I have always thought that LaFollette, there is an afterlife, and if he knows anything of what's going on, he must be rolling over in his grave to see how Nichols won out and the artists took over the arts building, all of their smells and laths and paint and so forth, that he lost that round. The buildings, of course, were, they were just building the student center and the practical arts building the year that I came. When I came for my interview in March, the, I don't know, it was the Tally Ho or the other, the one on Riverside was still up, but by the time I came in the fall, it was down and they were working on the student center. There was a forcible contribution, incidentally, to the student center. We all paid, was it $10 a year? Until we got to 100? Or,
Yeah, $10 a year until you got 100.
Until you got to 100. And I always waited until June to pay mine, just in case I could be run over during the year. Dr. Hurst, or Mr. Hurst, we'll see in the pictures in a minute, had already retired when I came, but was a very interesting individual. He'd written this book called 60 Years in a Classroom, which I read. It's filching a little bit because he counted sort of from kindergarten on, so he really hadn't taught all that many years. But his house, along with the president's house, was on Riverside next to the student center, and then when they expanded the student center, they needed those lots, and I think they worked out some sort of a deal with him that, and I don't know how old he was at this time, but was pretty well along in years, that he could continue to live in the student center as long as he lived if he would sell his house for the student center expansion. What they didn't realize was how many years he was going to live. And so some of you may have known him. He lived for many, many years, and quite a unique individual. He had pure white hair and a butch haircut at the time when people his age usually didn't have butch haircuts, and was quite a character in our department. I taught quite a few things as well, mostly World Civ when I came, because that's where the need was. And again, had the 16 hours and 45 students in a class. And exams went until from 10 till 12 on Friday, and grades were due at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And I like to average all of my 4 sections together. And so I had to wait until noon and correct the last batch and then average all of them and then average their exam grades in with the course grades. And the first quarter I didn't quite make it, and I was sitting nobly struggling away, and about 10 after 5 I got this call from Leo Hopman saying, where were my grades? And I came to know that that was very typical, and I got a crew to help correct and never had it happen again, but I was one of the unlucky ones that got caught by Leo. I think to keep us in something like time limits, let me run through a few slides. Ray has had a class in paper writing and research for students, undergraduate students, and for some years he had them do their papers on the history of Ball State. And I guess maybe while you've been chairman, anyway, Tony Edmonds has taken over and been teaching that for I think 2 times. And both of them have invited me to come in at some time along with various other people, some of you in the room I suspect, that have been come in as resource experts in what things were like in the good old days kind of thing. And so I pulled together some slides that I have shown to those students, and I've pared them down. There's not very many, but I think you might be interested in a few of these. So why don't I run through them, and then you can ask us all questions, or we'll go on as much time as we have.
There's Floyd Painter one from here when you came. Did you know Floyd Painter? She was here just 1 year.
This is all so much more elegant than it was when I taught that I don't know whether we'll do anything. One of the things that we had was, for the first couple years I was here, was the leaf rake. That in the fall they bought a lot of rakes and turned the faculty and students loose on an afternoon to rake the leaves. The last year that they did it, that might be Dwayne Deal, I'm not sure, down, maybe not, I don't know, but we're participating in that. It's my understanding or recollection that a couple of the girls broke their collarbones being tossed into those piles of leaves, and I think that ended the leaf rake. They also invented, a little later, other kinds of machines to chew them up and so forth. Homecoming was a much bigger deal in those days, in the 50s. I came in 52, and in the 50s, homecoming was a really big thing. Your students fell asleep in class regularly for a couple weeks in the fall because they'd been up till all hours of the night stuffing paper napkins in the floats. And here's just a sample of, you can see the elaborate and of course Queens, and I think this was the 53 or 54 Queen. Football games were played out across from the hospital in the old stadium. I believe I'm right that a season ticket to all of the games was $2, and bleachers only on this side. We did have a very stunning ROTC unit and band drill team there. And then this, I think, is 66 maybe. Anyway, this is of course the new stadium and a view from the new stadium. You can see the contrast. You can also see the bigger crowds. Even with a much smaller enrollment, we had more people filling up the bleachers. This was the PA building that was built the year I came. I think they originally ordered gargoyle to sit on the top up there, and there were a lot of letters to the editor and kind of nasty things about it, and so they sent it back and got that very dreary round wall. You can see how small the trees are that later grew. Then this is the library when they added on to the, it's now North Quad, the old auditorium, turned it into a library. This is another view. You can see they're still building on it. The doors closed, middle of construction. And this is building Cooper Science Building, looking toward the Arts Building. One of the things they had in the 50s was the Bike-A-Thon, and I was one of the few people that had a bicycle on the faculty. They rounded up 8 of us to be 2 teams. And was it Dooley that was there a Dooley, a tall fellow in geography? Well, anyway, there were these 2 teams, and the little short Italian violinist was on my team. And he went first and left me about half a lap behind this tall geographer on the other team. And then by the time I was done, our team was hopelessly out of the race. I think I was the only woman, and the other 7 were men in the race. They had people there to catch you as you got off your bike. We only rode a lap apiece, I think a total of a mile, and each did a fourth of a mile. And I thought, what do they have to have somebody there to catch me? And I stepped down, and my leg was just like rubber collapsed under me from the 1/4 of a mile. And there's Bob Korsgaard and Preston Emmons in the background. Some of you will recognize the dark-haired man. I can't think of his name.
Is that Ken Collier?
Well, it might be Ken Collier.
Yeah, Ken Collier.
Ken Collier, probably.
Yeah.
These were 4 of our student secretaries. We had some extremely bright students in those days. I think every one of these was in the 99th. We used to get their grades and their SAT scores, and I think all of these were 99th percentile in both math and verbal. We also had what they called selective retention instead of selective admission. Anybody who could come who had graduated from high school, and then we presumably flunked out the ones who couldn't make it. And always before the new quarter ended, a list came around of those who had made straight Fs, and they were automatically out, and some of the others on probation. But we had a tremendous range from extremely capable students to some extremely incapable. This is when John Hannaford had just got his doctor's degree, and we were having a party for him. John is at the far left. Jane in front of him, you'll recognize. Some of the others, Scheidler's, Lawrence Scheidler on the right, for whom the Scheidler apartments are named, taught in the department. He taught some Latin American history, and I inherited that for a year or 2 before Merrill Rippey came and was more qualified than I and took over that. This is graduation in those days before we had all of the tents and awnings and banners and things that we have nowadays. This was, I believe, 53. Yeah, this was before John had graduated. You can see he still has his master's robe on. He and I finished at about the same time. I ran a little ahead of him because I had come in as an assistant professor and he was still an instructor, and so I was a year ahead in promotion line from him. And Dick Caldemeyer and Roy Grunwald. And Dr. LaFollette. I noticed I put on the slide Dr. Bob, but to my knowledge, no one ever called him Bob to his name. Behind his back, maybe, but and Hannaford and Grunwald. This was Angie Wilson. I put it in because I thought some of you from Muncie might remember her. Taught at Burris, was still teaching at Burris when I came here in the 50s. I saw just, I think a couple years ago, that she had died out in Washington or Oregon, someplace in the Northwest. And this is Mrs. Mills, who got her degree, I think, rather late, and taught for us on kind of a part-time basis, filled in. And there's Dr. Painter. This, I think, I put them chronologically, but I'm not sure the exact dates. I think we're up to maybe 54 here, or perhaps 56. I think you'll recognize everybody in here. From left to right is Caldemeyer, Grunwald, Scruton, Mayfield, Hannaford, and Schrader. And you'll notice they all have cigarettes in their hands. That's another interesting circle that we've come, that when I came here, you couldn't smoke on campus. Faculty couldn't smoke, well, you could smoke on campus, but not in offices or in the buildings. And I helped, as a member of the FAC, the Faculty Advisory Council, I helped lead the move to get permission for faculty to smoke in their offices, because I didn't smoke and I could do it in an impartial sort of way. Well, we got the permission, and now we've gone full circle, and now I guess once again faculty can't smoke in their offices. They used to have to go out on the fire escapes and stand at the doors with Folger coffee cans as ashtrays between classes, and that didn't look very dignified. I've been told that Marcus Tishner, the librarian before Marion Grady, would actually, she would go along the sidewalks, and if she saw somebody smoking, would knock the cigarette out of his mouth. This was a party at Schrader's. Nelson Williams on the left, John Hannaford, Bob Yost, Les Smith, and here's more of the group. Schrader's, our host and hostess, Dr. LaFollette, the red tie, Roy Grunwald. Yeah. Hasn't changed all that much. And Whit Gordon, Les Hewitt. I guess they were talking about what a friendly department, and I think for the most part that was true during all the time. I was very happy always to be in this department. I think just before I came, it hadn't always been such a friendly campus. I think when LaFollette went on several times to Germany, there was a little dispute on who would be acting chair. And there was one faction that won out, supporting Dr. Painter, and the other faction supporting Everett Farrell, and the department had kind of split down the middle, and I think always there was a little bit of a schism in there, dating from that time. But the decision, he was back again, and there was none of that while I was here, and things settled down. It wasn't a terribly serious one, but and Rich Wires and Dave Scruton. I think we're up to 59 now. I think this is 59. Lauren Mayfield, Les Smith, Dave Scruton, Dr. There's Hamilton Easton that they've been talking about. Vicious, fierce man. You're supposed to fear. He was so neat. He never had so much as a paper clip left on his desk at night. His desk was next to mine. And mine, you could hardly find the space, clear space to write, and it was always a little humiliating to have his next to mine. And Houston and Wires. And this I like. These were my two presidents. I think he came to talk or an honorary degree, Virgil Hancher from the University of Iowa, where I had got my doctor's degree, and Dr. Emmett. And I think these are probably two of the handsomest university presidents in the country, and a nice picture of them. And there's Lawrence Hurst on the right, that lived for such a long time in the Student Center, and Roy Grunwald. And there are Schrader's, and Frank and I have gone on a picnic.
Great car.
1960, I think. Things from. I was going to start a series of famous people who spoke on campus, and I got as far as one picture of Eleanor Roosevelt. That's as far as my series ever went. So that was. This was here are the Kaldemeyers, Alan and Susie, Dick and Mary Kay in their strawberry patch. Dick supplemented his income by raising strawberries and chickens for eggs, and tried to raise sheep, but he had such a terrible time. Terrible things happened to them, and he paid more in vet bills, and more sheep died, and the mothers would die, and it was never very successful. He taught Russian history, and I think he fancied himself as a little kulak, but not a terribly prosperous one. Here are the little Kaldemeyer ones. Their house out on Bethel was about 4 miles out and seemed like a big hike into the country in those days. And I would hike out there, and one time I hiked out with my knapsack and tent and slept in their backyard with Alan, the boy there. Here's the family. The little baby is not theirs, is the child of one of our alums that was back visiting. You can see Steve on the left. This is the incipient judgeship in him. And the Grunwald family, soon after Beth was born. And our courthouse that Althea's Dopo worked so hard to, well, both save the courthouse and save the papers up in that dirty, musty attic. And here is Althea. Everett and Mary had Althea and me up to their cottage on Wawasee one time and took us out fishing, and this was the catch. This is Dr. Painter's retirement party in 1959. Dr. LaFollette took us all up to that Greek cafeteria in Elwood.
Mangus,
Yeah, Mangus. And here's Hurst again, and Dr. Painter, Steve Grunwald, Ernest Gruden, and Dr. LaFollette again at his party. We apparently gave him a TV set for a retirement present. And well, these now are at LaFollette's retirement. The first couple were Dr. Painter's retirement. This is at LaFollette's retirement. And here are LaFollette's here. His wife Beulah taught in El Paso, Texas during the school year in the high school, and then came home for the summer. Was a great bridge fiend, and so there would be many bridge parties and things while she was here for several months, and then she would go back to her teaching job and he would batch it again. And there's another picture from the LaFollette retirement party. Beulah is the one in the orange, peachy orange dress. And this is at Dr. Emmons' retirement in 68, I believe it was. End of the show.
If I can get the panel to reassemble for a few moments, in case there may be questions from the audience, please. There's one thing that has been failed to have been pointed out, is that for many years, starting with Rich Burkhart and continuing with Warren Vanderhill, the top dog, if I may use that expression, in the university from the academic standpoint was a member of the department. And that has got two sides of the coin. One side is, of course, that everyone felt they could do a lot for the departments. But some people are so scrupulously honest and so full of integrity. But the other side of the coin is a very important side. They cared about the personnel in the departments and the direction the department was taking, and they were keenly aware at all times of what was going on within the departments and personnel and activities throughout the period that I can remember. And I always thought that was a pretty good plus in the file analysis. Any questions that some people might have, anything that they might want to add?
I can remember one time in exams, we had these elementary blocks that took all their courses, these elementary students that took their classes together, their math and English and so forth, and were together all day. And it came time for exams, and mine was scheduled for, I think, one of these on Friday of the last day, and or maybe it was Thursday, and they said, can't we take it early? We're all free on Thursday. Can't we take it Thursday instead of Friday? And our English teacher is letting us take ours early there, and then we can be out a day early. And so I polled them and said, is there anybody who can't come on Thursday? And oh, that was all fine. And so we did it. And I was correcting the papers or something over in my office, and Dr. Burkhardt appeared at the door and I thought, well, what's he doing over in the arts building? How nice of him to come and see us. He came in. Said, I hear you moved your exam. Yes. And he said, we don't do that at all. So after that, I never did it again, although the kids continued to entreat and say other teachers did it, and I understand a lot of that goes on nowadays, that a lot of, when we had Friday float hours, that a lot of departments met on other times and had 3-day weekends, but when you said we ran a tight ship, we ran a tight ship.
I got a call from Rich Burkhardt one day. He said, how long you been here now, Mort? I said, 8 years. He said, what's your rank? I said, I'm an associate professor. He said, wouldn't you think that somebody who's been here 8 years and an associate professor could figure out how to read the final examination schedule? I had messed it up, and students were perhaps bolder in those days, perhaps not, but instead of going to the department chair, who was Everett Farrell at the time, they went straight to Burkhardt's office. And there were 20 or 25 very unhappy students, and his orders to me were, make sure they're all happy by the time the day is over.
Mr. Burkhardt used to visit classes once in a while. I don't know whether you got around to everybody always, but maybe just when they were up for tenure or something like that. But I had an 8 o'clock class one morning, and I was always there at 8, and lo and behold, in the back row sat Richard Burkhardt. Well, I was supposed to be teaching people how to teach in social studies in secondary school, but it was the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the students wanted to know whether we were going to be alive the next day or the day after that or something. And we had the 50 minutes of vigorous discussion of that. And I thought, what's he going to say? What the hell were you supposed to be doing here? After the class, he says, that's one of the most interesting classes I've ever been in. Thank you.
Thank you, that was the best part of the job.
But we got absolutely nowhere near what might be called the lesson for the day.
Which would have been how you won the war in the South Pacific.
Something that we haven't said is how many of our people have been drained off, shall we say, into administration. I made a list of the ones I thought of, and I don't know that it's complete, but Vanderhill, Idson, Hoover, Gilhold, Caldemeyer, Hannaford, Wires, Fussell have been taken off for other centers or institutes or positions or deanships or whatever. So I think that our department has contributed to the university as well as just to the department.
Your name should be on that list too, yes.
Yeah, Uhas.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did any of you have a run-in with President Emmons or
The only one that I can recall is one year I was president of FAC, which was the forerunner of the University Senate, and there were 7 of us on it, and I was secretary, and we spent a big part of our meeting always working on the minutes and working so that they would not antagonize President Emmons and word them just properly. But at any rate, we sent them, and then they came back, and you may remember that he edited with a blue pencil, and there had been some kind of a vote, and I said, the faculty will is that we do such and such, and he had crossed out will and written in his blue pencil in the margin and replaced it by wish, and he said, the faculty have no will.
He used to visit everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And you never knew when he was coming. And he taught us one time, the one time he visited us, we were in an apartment over on Gilbert Street. And either Pat's folks or my folks had been down there. This was a 1-bedroom apartment. They'd been there for a weekend or whatnot. We had just gotten rid of them. It was Sunday afternoon. They had left. I said, let's have a drink. We had sherbet glasses. I made 2 great big Manhattans. We sat down, there's a rap on the door. Here are the emmons. So I said, well, you have a drink? And he said, no, I can't. I got to go over and dedicate the bells at the Presbyterian.
The only time I saw him at loss for words was when we were having problems building the new library. Marion Grady had seized the plans of the library and refused to give them up because she'd had them for a year. She didn't want to give them up because she realized, I think, that she wouldn't be head of the library. So Bob Korsgaard and I, who were in AAUP, were sort of attempting to work as mediators. So we agreed we would take Marion over to President Emmons' office then. He didn't have a clear idea of what we were going to do, I think. Nor did she. I think she was more in the dark than he was. Because we came over and he started out, now Marion, where are the plans for the new library? And she said, President Emmons, if you mention that one more time, I'll throw up all over your carpet. He said nothing. We never got any further.
A sign of the changing times was that she would not let students or anybody go to the library in the summer in shorts.
And if you were faculty working in the library, you had to wear long sleeves.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to say that I was an advisor here from the time I came as well, and I had been an advisor of undergraduates, graduates, and ended up as an advisor for non-traditional students with an office out of Carmichael. And when the weather was nice at all, I would usually walk down from Carmichael to attend class here in this building. And I would pass all these buildings and think about the names that were attached to them and all. And then we began to hear very frequently that we're going to be the premier teaching institution. And I would think, and I'd look out here at this plaque as I'd go into my classroom, which is between these doors. And I think, well, under leadership of people like these whose names are attached to all this, wasn't it always that way?
That is a good point at which to end this commemoration. Ray?
Thank you all for coming. It's really good to see you. And we have some punch and cookies upstairs, like 15 dozen cookies. For you to come up and share that with us and maybe visit a little bit longer. It's in the coffee room back in the far corner. And if you need the elevator, we have that facility upstairs.
You know, with all this audio-visual things, I forgot to mention that when I came here, we had 2 rooms on campus in which you could show movies, and you had to requisition them. They were over in TMS, and you had to reserve them and move your whole class over to that room to see a movie. Now you can sit here and punch all these buttons and heaven knows what, and nothing happens. Well, it might be better moving to TMS.